Welcome to the July 13th City Council work session. We have two items today. One is on retail cannabis sales tax and the other on the rental housing code. We'll start up with retail cannabis tax. Andrew?
Thank you, Mayor. Glenn will lead us through that discussion.
So this work session was requested by Claire to take a look at the possibility of both a tax on retail sales and also possible restrictions that the council might want to place on the operation of retail establishments. For the tax, the critical thing to know is that state law allows cities to impose a tax, limits the tax to 3%, and requires that the voters approve that at a November election in an even-numbered year. In order to hit that time frame, the council has to take action to refer this before you go on your summer break. So to make that possible, given the limitations or the requirements of the city charter, we actually have prepared a proposed ordinance that's in your packet for the 3%. It was posted. There's a public hearing scheduled for next Monday and action scheduled for the 25th. If you decide today that you do not want to actually move forward with the tax, we'll just cancel the public hearing and the ordinance will come down. But the only way to give you the option of actually referring it was to take those steps before you actually had your work session. So that's why that information's all out there. For any other regulation, those do not need to actually go to the voters. So you're not under the same time frame or restrictions that you are with the tax. You could have your conversation today and give direction as to what would go into a proposed ordinance. You could decide today to have another work session, and at that point, give us direction as to what goes into the proposed ordinance. What you cannot do is actually take action on that before your summer break. Since we didn't have any direction on what kinds of restrictions you might want, we couldn't prepare that same kind of proposed ordinance. And so once you give that direction, we'll need to prepare the proposed ordinance, give notice of it, schedule a public hearing, and with the charter requirement, we can't do that before your summer break. So public hearing would need to be in September or later. You have two motions suggested in your packet on page 2 of the AIS. One for the tax, if you decide you want to move forward with that, and one for other regulations, if you decide to move forward with those. Happy to answer questions, and we have other folks here who might answer other questions for you, but that's all we were planning to present and then let you have your conversation.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn to Claire and see if she would like to start the conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So I'm very pleased we're having this work session, and I hope that Council will agree that this is a good opportunity for the city to take advantage of a new revenue source. This comes out of a statewide voter initiative where the voters of the state decided they wanted to tax, regulate, and legalize recreational marijuana in the state. The proposal would not apply to medical marijuana. I think that's very important to make that distinction. It would be strictly for retail cannabis. And while I support, our no sales tax state, I think this is a unique situation, just like we have a state tax on liquor. I think this product falls into that same category, and I think it's perfectly proper for us to add a tax to it in some part. The state tax will go in some ways towards drug counseling. Some of that tax will come back to the city for law enforcement purposes. So what we're looking at today is that extra 3% local tax that's allowed by the law that we could actually use at our discretion. My proposal, my hope, if we decide to implement this tax, is that we would have some of it dedicated to specific needs that we've identified over the last few years in our budget, and just a little bit that might be in the general fund. I did have a question about that, but my intent would be that we would dedicate some portion of it, perhaps about a third, to parks operation and maintenance, which has been one of our areas of the general fund that we've really struggled to support. Adding back to the base of our human services funding, as well as other programs we as a city might want to fund for social services, perhaps a small amount to the arts, and then the remainder to the general fund. My question for staff would be if we articulated those particulars and even assigned proportions to those. If at some point in the future we decided, well, gosh, we've got way more than we need for this area of funding and we'd like to reallocate it, would we need to go back out to the voters and take that back out for another vote?
No, you could handle that a couple different ways. One way is you could decide to put those allocations into the ordinance itself, but there's nothing that actually requires you to do that. You can just have that as a policy if you chose to do that. If you put it into the ordinance, even though the voters would have approved the ordinance, it doesn't become like the charter where the council can't amend it. So you could, if you wanted to change the percentage, I'd have to check. That might have to go back out to the voters, but if all you're doing is changing how you're going to use the funds, if it's in the ordinance, then you could change it by an ordinance.
Okay. Because my thinking is we could establish those allocations, see how that goes for 3 years, and then revisit those allocations if our budget needs changed up. And I'd like a second round.
Sure. George Poley.
Thank you. I am all in favor of moving this forward to public hearing and also for the vote. Although I'm still kind of up in the air about dividing the tax money into specifics versus general fund. My preference would be to do it general fund, but if we're going to have the discussion about dividing the money up, the tax revenue up, I would want to make sure that it would go to drug and alcohol counseling and rehabilitation, and a certain amount of it go to law enforcement also. So that, if we're going to have that discussion, I think we need to do that at a later time. Also, and I haven't really had that much time to go over this, we received a memo from Casey Houlihan, who I see is in the audience this morning, from the Oregon Retailers of Cannabis Association, making some recommendations to our ordinance. Have you had time to look at that, Glenn?
I saw that it came in. I glanced at it very quickly before this meeting. The most important thing to know about that is that can't happen until September.
Okay.
There's no way to do it between now and the end of your summer schedule.
All right, and that's what I wanted to clarify, because of the proposals, I'm in favor of all the proposals that they put in there, except for the one on the school buffering and grandfathering exemptions, and that I'd like to get a little more education on that before I make a decisions. But the other recommendations that they've suggested, I think are very legitimate. I think they're good recommendations, and I think that in the future we should have the discussion to put them into our ordinance.
Well, and the council, just to be clear, the council could give direction today or between now and the end of your of July that you want an ordinance prepared that incorporates those into the ordinance. It's just we wouldn't be able to have the public hearing under the charter within the time we have left before you go on break.
Right.
So you could give that direction today if you wanted to. That would then get scheduled for a public hearing in September.
No, I don't know if that's necessary now, but I'm sure we'll hear opinions on some of these recommendations during the public hearing on the in July anyway on this. So, like I said, I'd like to get a little more education on that one specific one, and then hear what the rest of the public and my fellow councilors have to say about some of those recommendations.
So I've got 3 people in the queue, but before that I just want to clarify, 4 people in the queue. I want to clarify something, and my understanding is the current revenue that's coming to the state, part of that comes back to the city, and it is for the purpose of law enforcement and rehab and those kinds of things, and that's already in the state legislation, correct?
Correct, and there's, and I'm not positive of the dates, but there's the preliminary revenue that's coming based on one formula, and then I think it's after sometime in 2017, maybe it's as of July 1 of 2017, there will be a different formula as to how the state distributes the funds.
Thank you. All right, Mike, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. I too, I suppose, in looking at those other pieces, would just off the cuff, I suppose I would be in favor of the residency requirement piece, and I would certainly be open to good arguments about why that wouldn't be a good idea. But I would think that a good part to have added to this ordinance. My understanding of the state law, City Attorney, is that either us or the county may have that 3%. Do I have that right? But not both?
Both. My understanding is that if the county has the 3%, it only applies outside of city limits.
Okay.
Initiative.
I had one other question. I was thinking, I'm actually generally kind of 50-50 on this question. What are the arguments in favor? I suppose I'll throw out to Claire, who suggested this, and to others who want to maybe persuade me, because I'm 50-50 on this. The idea of the 1,000-foot buffer, if that's a good idea or a bad idea.
You'll get a turn.
Sure. And as well, again, then the residency requirement piece. Those two interest me. That's it.
Betty.
Thank you. I'm in favor of going ahead with the public hearing. I'm not in favor of designating how the money would be spent. I think if it passes and we get money, it should go in the general fund, in my opinion. And there should be discussions to how to spend it instead of some thoughtful discussion about what's most needed, instead of suddenly saying, got this and this and this, which is I objected to in the urban renewal thing, saying it's a part of what I objected to. But I'm definitely in favor of going ahead with the public hearing.
Chris?
Thank you. I won't really go into the details of the specific aspects to it, so I'll just really talk about whether or not I'm supportive of the basic idea. And as a new tax or revenue option, I think it really does need to go before the voters. So the legislature was wise in doing that. This is a new source of income. And I'm certainly happy to go ahead and have the public hearing, because it would put it before the voters and let them make the ultimate decision on it. I think with regard to the use of the money, I don't have a specific preference one way or the other, but I do know that we need to, before Election Day, tell the voters specifically what that money will be used for. Because when I walk into a store and I give that store money, I want to know what I'm buying. I don't want just a bag that I don't know what's in it. And that's what it is if we say, well, it just goes into the general fund. Trust me. I don't think it will pass. So I think if you're going to ask the public to give you money, you need to be able to tell the public pretty specifically what you intend to do with that money. Now, I'm open to conversations about what we do with that money, and I think it needs to be a balance of what the state will provide and what we truly need. But if we say, well, we want this money, we want to stick it in the general fund and, do good and avoid evil, people can draw all sorts of conclusions about what that looks like. So I'm supportive of the public hearing. I'm supportive of putting it on the ballot, and I think part of that would need to be, just like we do with bond measures, for streets or roads or anything else, we need to have a specific list of what we intend to do with that money.
Yeah, I'm also supportive of sending it to the voters in November. The allocation of the 17% that's being collected, we would collect another 3%, so that'd be 20, and it started out as 25, is being reduced. So the allocation would be 10% to city law enforcement off of the money that the state collects, 15% to the state police, so 25% of it's going to law enforcement already, 40% to schools, 20% to alcohol and drug programs, then 10% to counties, and then 5% to the Oregon Health Plan. So the things that you'd think that this would go for are already embedded in this. This is determined by the state, this allocation, or Glenn, was that in the state law?
The allocation that you just referenced is in state law.
So it has to go through public process, and the legislature could change it, but
Correct, for that 17%.
Yeah,
The
right.
state doesn't dictate how you decide to use the 3%.
right. So because it's going to all that stuff, I like Claire's allocation scheme. That seems to make sense because those are the things that it doesn't go to already. And I absolutely agree with Chris. One thing that we've learned over time is that when we put something out to the ballot, we need to be as crystal clear as we possibly can. For me, that means that we need to clearly allocate where this money is going to go before it goes to the November ballot. Do we have an estimate of revenue that this might collect?
The numbers are way too preliminary. Do we even have a ballpark?
200 grand.
Big ballpark.
Yeah, I'll start with, the numbers are way preliminary. And we took a look at 3 different ways of estimating revenues based on activity to date in Oregon, activity in Washington, and then a report done by the Tax Foundation that looked at this. And based on those analyses, very, very preliminarily, we're thinking somewhere between about $200,000 to $600,000 a year.
What was the 3 different, how'd you come up with that? That's a pretty good range, but.
Well, right. I mean, it's brand new. Every report you read on how to estimate revenues on this tax will say, be cautious, because
Sure.
we don't really know. The first method was to look at the receipts to date in the state. The state doesn't provide data, local data, so we don't know how much of that was actually generated in Eugene. So we just took that 2 months worth of data and extrapolated that out and based Eugene's share on population. I think that's going to be on the low side because, this system is still getting up and running and not everybody's registered and paying and all that stuff yet. So, but that would get you the $200,000 range. And then looking at Washington state sales, and adjusting that for the size of Oregon's population was how we came up with about $600,000 on the other end. And that's been in place a little bit longer. There's a little bit more history, so we can see it's a more established program. I think one thing we did read is that it kind of, you would expect the revenue to go up over time as the program gets put in place.
Okay. And I won't make any jokes about our proportional share of sales. Okay.
Just own it.
Yeah, Eugene's is going to be higher, so to speak.
Good one.
Keep your day job.
George Brown.
Good Lord.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, I think this is a really bad idea. It's a terrible idea. It sets a really bad precedent. I'm not going to support this. I don't even think it should go to the voters. Council majority seems willing to send it to the voters. You have to. It's a tax. I'm convinced it'll fail. We do not tax alcohol. We do not tax tobacco. We do not tax medical marijuana. Why would we want it? I don't understand why we would tax recreational marijuana. Is this a sin tax? Because it's bad, but alcohol and tobacco aren't bad. I mean, I honestly don't get it. I don't even understand why we're considering this other than as another source of possible source of free money. You keep adding on these layers of taxes, in which you're going to, I believe what will happen is that, hey, why should I pay these high prices? I'll just buy from my old dealer, or grow it myself. I'm pretty sure even if it passed, that's probably what would happen. I don't think it will pass. I think voters will reject it. Because a logical question for a voter would be, gee, they want to tax marijuana. What will be next? What will the council decide to tax next? We don't tax food. We don't tax anything. There's no sales tax in Oregon. These are the equivalent of excise taxes, and that's done at the state level. I did a little figuring. By my figures, what I was able to get online and information from the Oregon Department of Revenue, the state sales tax on marijuana this year will probably be about $20 million. 10% of that is going to go to cities. $2 million will go to the cities. Eugene's share of that will be about 10%. So we'll get about $200,000 is my guess, give or take, this first year. That will probably go up, but I think we should just be happy with that and not try to do this. I just think it's a really bad idea, and I won't support it. Thanks.
Greg?
I think I'll pass, Mayor. I think most people said what I thought, what they've been thinking about anyway.
Round two. Claire?
Thank you. So on the question of the regulation, some of you hadn't had a chance to read the letter we got from the Oregon Cannabis Retail Association. But if you did, I think the bigger piece in there is the request to impose a 1,000-foot buffer, which a number of other cities have done so. And I think the comparison to the fact that liquor stores are not allowed to locate within 1,000 feet of each other, right? OLCC has some pretty prescribed regulations for where they will cite liquor stores, but they didn't create that same regime for the retail shops. And what we're seeing right now in Eugene is that retail cannabis outlets are a very popular item, and we even saw over by campus, Barry's Deli's second location got displaced. He lost his lease to a cannabis store. So what I'm hearing is because right now Eugene doesn't have the 1,000-foot buffer that other localities are putting on there, all eyes are on us in terms of out-of-state corporations who have been doing business in Colorado, wanting to come and open up shops here, which is fine. But in this first beginning of this new market is actually, in my mind, a threat to our local folks who are trying to get up and running. And they may lease a store and then find an out-of-state business has opened up shop right next door to them, because there's no prohibition on doing that. And they can undercut the market because they've got deep pockets, because they're an already established corporation, and would create a lot of upheaval, potentially driving out of business our local folks. Also, I think impacting other retail, not related to the cannabis industry, as I just referenced with Barry's location. So the proposal from the Business Association is a limited duration buffer. So they're proposing a 2-year ordinance that would impose that buffer while things shake out, basically. So in my mind, it's a way to kind of moderate what, we many of us like the free market idea, but this is a very, it is a market with a lot of factors that are creating a dynamic that I think does not mean free market competition. It's an unequal competitive market, and this would allow some time for our local folks to establish themselves. Would also, I think, give the community some confidence that they weren't going to see marijuana shops popping up every 500 feet around town. And I'll need actually another round.
Okay. Betty?
Thank you. I'm confused by what George Brown said. We don't get a local tax, but this wouldn't be any more tax than his own alcohol, would it, in total?
I don't know what the tax is.
I don't know. I think we should get rid of it, but anyway, I think it is. There is a tax on any alcohol you buy. There's a huge tax on cigarettes.
State tax, not local,
State,
not
yeah, I know.
city.
But I see this as a chance to, well, as George said, a chance to get more money, because goodness knows we need more revenue. But I disagree with Alan about this being comparable to tax levies we've done. When we do a tax for roads, for example, that goes on everyone's tax bill, whether they want to drive or not. And this is not. This would just be for people who choose to purchase marijuana. So it is not. We're not really levying a tax on everyone, and it's not a necessity. I don't know. I could see arguments philosophically against. I don't believe in send taxes, but it seems to me we already have those. and it would be, we certainly need revenue, but I'm totally opposed to designating exactly what it's for. And I think that people do trust us with their money. We have a general fund, and we don't say that we don't have it designated what every bit of someone's real estate tax money goes for. It goes for what we finally decide is most important or what absolutely has to be done. And we do have a lot of things that absolutely need to be done that we can't do. And this seems like an easy source of revenue. Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Everyone knows that when this measure was passed at the state level, that one of the central tenets of the argument in favor was legalize it, tax and regulate it. So there isn't anyone really that's in favor of legalizing it that doesn't already accept that premise, because it was a central part of the campaign. And I get that. And I get sending this to the voters allows them to decide. And that's that's one of the persuasive arguments for me in favor of doing this. But I was waiting to hear that there was a pressing need for the money. And just because we can do it, and just because most people expect us to do it, for me doesn't mean we have to do it today. And so I was looking for the piece of the argument that said we need to do this now as opposed to 2 years from now. And I don't understand why it's pressing. It seems a little bit like an answer in search of a problem, only that we're saying, well, we've got to come up with something to spend the money on that we can tell people we're going to spend the money on in order for it to pass. And so I'm tending to lean against the idea of sending it out, just because of the fact that it seems like we're enacting it only because we can, not because we're trying to solve a more specific problem. Thank you.
Alan?
Oh, I just wanted to clarify for Betty. I wasn't comparing this to the road tax. So I agree with what you said completely. What I was trying to make the point was that strategy to get it passed should. One of the things that we've seen that has been successful in the past is that we need to be as clear and specific as we possibly can. And just saying we're going to collect a bunch of money and then it's going to go into the general fund and we'll let you know what it's going to be spent on later, I don't think is a good winning strategy for a ballot measure in November.
Okay. All right. Next up, I have Chris and George polling, and then Greg, and then your third round.
Thanks. I think actually a very interesting question is, do we need the money? And yeah, I can probably come up with a list of very immediate pressing needs. So I probably could think of the first one you mentioned was human service funding. We have cut that back by a significant amount of money in the last several budgets, and we've not been able to find the resources to really restore it back to where it should be. And to me, that is an extremely pressing need that we have right now that we don't anticipate having the budget resources, even in the next cycle or the cycle after that, to really solve that issue. So I remember working with George and Andrea Ortiz on a committee to try to find sources for additional funding for human services. And this was a number of years ago. And that work, which was really good, is still sitting on the shelf waiting for the funding to be able to implement it. And so I would see this, and this is just one example. I don't have enough time to give an equal amount of description to some of the other things I may have. But I can think of probably 2 or 3 very pressing needs for the money that we could use right now, just off the top of my head.
George Polling?
Chris actually covered the same point that I was going to make about we're always looking for additional increasing the funding into our budget. This is a good way to do that, whether it goes into the general fund or earmarked for portions going elsewhere. That, like I said, that's a discussion that we can have at a later time. The state, as Alan pointed out, has already embedded some of the percentages of the state tax where it goes. I think those were wise choices. And I personally, if we're not going to just put it in a general fund, I will go back again to what I was saying about drug and alcohol rehab and counseling and law enforcement, because these are the areas that are going to be impacted the most as far as requests for services, requiring services. Now, whether it just be law enforcement or public safety to include the fire department, that can be discussed later, but that's where I am on that. And we do need to move this to let the voters. It's not like everybody's going to be paying these taxes. It's the people that are going to be buying the recreational marijuana that'll be paying the taxes. So I don't necessarily believe it has to be spelled out for the voters where that money is going, unlike like Betty was saying, like with some of our bond measures and property taxes.
So that discussion about how, if you decide to move it forward, it would be allocated, brings up an important point in my mind, and it's one that comes up to my mind during the budget process too. Sometimes as we're thinking about things, we forget to ask the people that we hire to do this work exactly how they think it can make the most difference for the work that they're doing. We assume that you might ask, for instance, Chief Currens, and he might come back and say X about cab or law enforcement, but we haven't asked him, so we don't know what he thinks would allow him to do his job the best that it can be done. And so I would suggest, as you move forward to think about this, instead of us, preliminarily debating what we each might think are the priorities, that we actually ask the people we hire who have the expertise to give us their advice about how they think we might move these issues that we care so deeply about, whether it's parks, whether it's public safety, whether it's human services, or a combination, because those things are not unlinked. So there might be something really significant that's not on the top of our heads that could make leverage what we're already doing and make better use of the resources we have and the talent we have on our staff. And so that would be my suggestion, that you all think about bringing them into the conversation before you make any kind of direction. So that's Greg, you're next.
Thanks, Mayor. I somewhat concur with what you just said. However, I'm going to throw my 2 cents in here. I think that over the last 6 months, we've had various presentations from staff about needs and issues that, could, benefit from this new, potentially new revenue source. A couple of things is community court, which we, talked about just a few weeks ago. We also have talked about our Housing First program and how we are going to move forward with that. And then, we're going to have a further discussion, I think, that if Councilor Zelenka's poll is affirmed, about rest stops. And so, we have some pressing chronic needs that we have a need to, fund and support that are already there on the table. And I think that staff has done the background work on this. I think it's up to us to kind of decide, okay, if we send this to the voters do pass this, to give the voters an idea before they go to the ballot is precisely what the council's intent is around allocating new resources for existing chronic needs. And so I think that we don't have a shortage of, things that we need to fund. We've got deficits in parks, we got deficits in public safety, we got deficits all over the place for things that we just have not had the revenue for years. I mean, years. So I think that we should think very carefully about this. But, the things that just come up in my mind right off the bat are the things like community court, like, the rest stops, and also looking at how we can, throw money, but how we can be very prescriptive about where we, focus our money around a Housing First model that will help alleviate some of our homeless issues and needs that we have in our community.
So I'm going to try to wrap this up by quarter 2, and we have 3 people in the queue. Claire.
Thank you. So I'm happy to wait and hear from folks who have opinions about this at our public hearing about whether they would prefer that we have it dedicated to specific things or not. I'm open to that question. I do think people tend to be more supportive of a tax when they know what our intention is for it. And the citizens of the state, as I think Councilor Clark pointed out, passed this new law. They built into it the ability for this 3% local tax, no more than that. And I think they put a lot of thought into how those taxes might impact the market. And I think they're very smart in dialing in a tax that could provide some benefit to the community without driving people to the black market. So I think this was a very thoughtfully crafted initiative. As far as urgency, I know, Councilor Clark, you and I both have parks in our ward that cannot be developed right now because we don't have the money to operate and maintain them. And our constituents are starting to lose patience with that. And it's been something on my to-do list to find new source of revenue so that we can get those parks developed and start maintaining our parks. So, my little slogan would be weed for weeding on that one, or green for green was the other one I came up with. And we've also heard from the Budget Committee in this last cycle a very strong desire to increase our funding for social services. We added funding to Cahoots, but we kind of took that out of reserves. And so this would be a way to build upon bringing back our human services funding, Housing First, rest stops, and other things. So I do feel a sense of urgency around this to not forego a year or two worth of potential revenue if the voters of the city agree. And we have limited ways of raising revenue otherwise. So this is a new opportunity. In terms of the regulation piece, setting aside the tax, there is a bit of urgency around that, and I recognize we can't pass an ordinance before we go on break around that. But I would like us to try to expedite the next work session on it. And the reason is that around October 1st is when we expect OLCC to be issuing permits for people to start opening up their retail locations. And if this body desires to put some extra regulations on that, I think it's only fair of us to try to do that before that deadline, so we don't have folks getting permitted and then we turn around 2 months later and change the landscape on them. So we may not agree as a body that we want to impose those regulations, but if we think we might, I would like us to try to have a work session before our break, which I know will be a squeeze, so that we can come back in September and consider an ordinance.
Mike?
Agreed on the restrictions and having a work session before we go in order to be able to address that. As an ad guy, I have to say it's, get rid of the weeds with weed. That's a persuasive argument, by the way.
Slogan factory.
Yeah, I'm a word guy. It's a persuasive argument. Several of them. I would be interested in, I don't know if it's the chief's opinion or whose best opinion on staff this would be, of adding another 3% to that price. There would be some effect on the black market, and my question, it would seem at such a small percentage to be a negligible effect, but I would be interested in an informed opinion on the likelihood of that effect, which I suppose we can hear at the public hearing. So there's really no reason not to have a public hearing and hear more information about it, even if regardless of the final decision. So, yeah, all right.
Betty?
Okay. A recreation program is a big need, but I don't think we should suddenly, in a short time, decide how we're going to spend money we might get. This reminds me of when I thought I was getting a summer job when I was 15 and 16, and I looked through the Sears Roebuck catalog and had a long list of things I was going to get just because I thought I was getting the money. But I think that the money should be we shouldn't think we have to spend it if we get it, but there are the recreation program we used to have is far greater than anything we have now, and it is connected to public safety. If we had a really good recreation program, we would have less need for police actions. But those things all require a lot of thought about what we need and why, and we need the public's, not just staff, but the public's opinion on those things. And I know that, I hope that we're not helping the black market by imposing a tax. And we could have a slogan like "Smoke more for your parks." But
There's no smoking in parks.
for your parks.
It's for your parks, not in your parks.
George Brown, really quickly.
Thanks, Mayor. So I did a few more calculations, and I figured that, the preliminary estimates of the state collection of the tax this first year is going to be about $20 million. That means that the sales were about $80 million in Oregon so far. So Eugene's sales will be around $8 million a year. 3% of $8 million is $240,000. That matches very closely what Sue Cutso-George said. Really, that's a drop in the bucket considering the whole general fund. And we're talking about, housing first and rest stops and law enforcement and all these important things that do need more money. But I know how to raise a heck of a lot more money than $240,000 a year with the tax on marijuana. Let's tax alcohol. That causes infinitely more damage than marijuana has ever caused. Let's have a tax on tobacco sales. Same thing, because it's more of a danger to public health than marijuana. So, and now we're probably talking about millions of dollars raised in tax. So I just feel like it's just a bad idea to pick one thing and say, okay, we're going to have a retail tax on this. What will be next? Herbal medicines or something? That's why we'll oppose it. Thank you.
I think we're going to put a motion out here for the 3%, and you'll help us with that, right? And then you need another. Do you need another motion for pursuing having a?
I can put them both into one motion if you want.
Okay, go.
The motion I would recommend, Greg, would be move to direct the city manager to move forward with the public hearing on July 18th on the proposed ordinance and to schedule an additional work session to discuss possible regulations of retail marijuana sales businesses.
What you said.
Second, what you said.
Second. Okay. Everybody ready to vote on that? Okay, all those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Everybody? Are you one in opposition? Yep, there he is. Okay. 7 to 1. It passes. All right, thank you all very much. We move on to the second item for today, and that is the rental housing code overview.
And staff will present that. Rochelle will lead the discussion, I believe. Is that right, Lori?
Clear. If it's all for parks, it's easy. Smoke Eugene Green.
Stop.
We're moving on.
I'm glad you're thinking.
Wait till I come back with the soda tax.
Okay, rental code. City manager.
Gonna turn over to Rochelle.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Let's see. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Rochelle Nicholas. I'm the manager for the city's code compliance program. I'm here today with Lori Keebeth, the Director of Finance for the Planning and Development Department. We are here to provide a brief overview of the rental housing code. In 2005, the City Council at the time determined there was a need to have a local option for tenants to resolve health and safety housing concerns. Many other cities in Oregon have adopted similar codes. Without the rental housing code, a tenant would need to go through the court system to get an unwilling owner to make repairs. When the code was adopted, it included 4 minimum habitability standards: structural integrity, plumbing, heating, and weatherproofing. In 2007, the code was expanded to include smoke detectors and security. And then in 2009, visible mold was added under the existing plumbing and weatherproofing standards. Today, we have 6 minimum habitability standards, with visible mold addressed as a symptom of water intrusion under plumbing and weatherproofing. The goal of the Rental Housing Code is to help renters and owners communicate with each other to resolve issues without the city's involvement. The code requires tenants to notify their owner or property manager in writing before the city will get involved. If a complaint is received, staff contact the owner or property manager to notify them of the complaint and the scheduled inspection. If staff confirm a violation, a notice to correct is given that provides the owner 10 days to correct any violations. Depending on the violation, additional time may be necessary. If after working with the owner, corrections are not made, a civil penalty may be issued. An owner can appeal to a hearings official. Since 2005, staff has handled 303 formal complaints. Additionally, staff help walk-in and online inquiries, as well as respond to about 300 phone calls from tenants each year. Staff help tenants determine if the city is able to help them, and if not, they provide contacts for other agencies that may be able to assist them. Often, tenants are not aware of their rights, so staff may provide them with information about the landlord-tenant law or other resources. The following slides are examples of violations of each of the 6 habitability standards. In this first slide, we have examples of heating violations. The picture on the right is a cadet heater that was removed, leaving exposed live wires. The 2 pictures on the left are baseboard heaters that aren't functioning, also with exposed wires. Here are a few examples where doors and windows are not able to be secured. The 2 pictures on the left are windows that are no longer secured to the frame. The window panes were taped with electrical tape in an attempt to keep them from falling out. Here are 2 examples of inoperable smoke detectors. This slide has 3 examples of leaking or faulty plumbing components. Here we have 3 examples of violations of the structural integrity standard. These are pictures of structural components that are compromised and at risk of failing. The first 2 pictures on the left are examples of walls that are pulling away from the roof. The one on the right is the foundation wall of a 2-story house. This one was posted as unsafe to occupy, and the tenants were relocated. For weatherproofing, here are 2 examples where roofs were tarped in an effort to address ongoing leaks. The picture on the bottom is a home that has no eaves, which resulted in water entering the walls and ultimately mold growth, which you will see in the next slide. These are all examples of visible mold caused by water intrusion. The one in the middle was a plumbing leak behind the wall. The picture on the right is from an ongoing roof leak. And the picture on the left is from the house with no eaves that was shown in the previous slide. In 2011, Council recommended that staff work with the Housing Policy Advisory Board to form a subcommittee to conduct a review of program activity. The work of that committee was presented to Council at a work session on April 18, 2012. Council recommended staff continue to work with the Housing Policy Advisory Board to continue a review of the program. Since that time, the committee has reviewed program financials, staff activity, a sampling of cases, and codes from other similar communities. Based on their work, the committee provided a recommendation to the Housing Policy Advisory Board last March. The full recommendation is included in your packet. Part of the recommendation was to add a few standards, including working electrical systems, carbon monoxide detectors, rodent control, and working appliances, as well as to shorten timelines when an essential utility is not functioning, such as heat in the winter.
The Special Revenue Fund of Rental Housing was created in fiscal year 10 as a request of the Rental Housing Department Advisory Committee. The $10 per unit fee is lower than other cities of comparable sizes. The budget covers 2 FTEs, part of a vehicle, materials and supplies, and program outreach. Because it's a small program, we've been very conservative in our expenditures, and at the same time, over the last few years, the rental housing units have gone up. We are currently working on expanding our outreach, which will expand usage of the program, and we will be conducting deeper financial analysis to see if the program needs to be adjusted. And the next slide shows a comparison of similar-sized cities, and it shows that, in general, our average fee is lower, and we've kept our rate stable, have not changed it in over 10 years. And on the next slide, just a summary of the original sunset was to occur in 2008. It's been extended 2 times, and it's currently set to expire September 30th. So on the next slide, we're asking you to consider a few options. Either you can extend the ordinance in order to allow more time to discuss the Housing Policy Advisory Board's recommendations, or you can extend it to just include the recommendations. You could extend the ordinance with no changes, or you can choose to take no action, and the program will sunset September 30th.
And you are finished?
And that concludes our presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Betty, George Polling, and Clara Sarah, and Allen, Chris and Allen. Okay. Hey, Betty.
Thank you. And thank you for telling it the way it is and briefly. I appreciate that. I want to say what I think we should do, but also there was a housing code in the 80s and 90s. And it was stronger than the one we have now, at least in some aspects, I know. Well, for one thing, if a tenant complained and it was found to be a legitimate complaint, that landlord, if they own a lot of property, could not raise anyone's rent for a full year. And that was a threat that caused them to pay some attention. I had occasion to use it once. And they were afraid of complaints. That was dropped because of Measure 5 and 47 someplace back in the budget cutting without sufficient thought. That was one of the items that was dropped because of cuts to the budget. And people thought that there were already state laws covering it, which of course doesn't work for people who don't have a lot of money to hire attorneys. The current thing was initiated mainly by students. Some of you will remember that. It was a lot of them community college students. And they worked really hard. They worked hard talking to all the counselors, coming to council meetings, doing research about other places. And, of course, those people have mostly moved away now. They certainly finished. They're not in school anymore, and they're not here anymore. And besides that, they didn't have the resources to watch us all the time to see whether we're really doing it or whether we're really continuing it or whether it would sunset. On the other hand, the Landlords Association has enough money to have people to watch us and keep asking for to pay less money and to sunset the ordinance. My opinion is we should get rid of the sunset completely. You can always stop it in the future if you want to, somebody can, but the sunset I think is ridiculous. The people who really worked for this did not have the money at that time to hire somebody to watch. And they have other lives. And no one is dedicated to watching that we have rental regulations. So why should we make them keep watching or someone keep coming back and begging us to extend the sunset or drop the sunset? I think it's really important that we drop the sunset. And I'm running out of time.
Another round?
Yes, for a little bit.
George Polling?
Thank you. On option A, my question is, what would the further discussions of the Housing Policy Advisory Board, what would they be discussing further. I mean, they've made some recommendations already. Would they look at adding more recommendations?
Yeah, it's for council.
For this council.
Oh, sorry.
Their
Well,
recommendations.
let me clean my glasses off.
I was with you, George.
I don't know. I thought it was. Also, on the proposed code changes, would that go through public hearing?
Yes, and it would have to be an ordinance, just like any other ordinance.
And then the two I have some minor questions about is the rodent control. This is rats specifically. I have seen houses where they're having a rat or a rodent problem, but it's not because of their fault. It's because of their neighbors or the part of the terrain where they're living in. How is that going to be addressed? Would they bring somebody in to address the cause of the problem next door, or the infestation in a creek nearby, or what?
Yes, we and we do have some code to address this under the nuisance program, but we do work with all the surrounding areas to address the specific issue, whether it be the fact that they have rodent harborage in blackberries or whatever the issue is. It certainly wouldn't be punitive to the owner or tenant. It would be trying to resolve the issue.
Okay. Are nutria considered rats? The other question I had is on working appliances. I'm just a little concerned about the definition of a working appliance, and if it doesn't work, is there going to be something requiring a property owner to pull it out and replace it? Do they have to replace it with brand new or refurbished, or what's the end result there going to be?
I think the conversation that they were having was that if an owner supplies a specific appliance, that appliance needs to be working. How they resolve that is up to them. I mean, if they can find a used appliance that will work,
It has to be working.
it needs to be working. So,
Yeah, I'll have to disagree with Betty on the idea of a sunset. I think it's a great idea because it forces the council to review it, and changes do happen, things do occur, and it's not a bad idea to review it on a regular basis. I personally have not heard from anybody asking us to repeal this at all. So at this point, I would like to see the sunset date stay in the ordinances, so we basically are forced to review it and see if we do need to make any changes, whether it be adding, subtracting some of the code changes or the cost of the program, et cetera.
Claire?
Thank you. So I agree with Councilor Taylor, actually. I think it seems to me this has been a successful and beneficial program for renters in this community, and I frankly don't understand why we have a sunset date on it. Your background was very helpful, Councilor Taylor. I agree, periodic review is a good idea, and keeping the advisory body would then ensure that they, keep tabs on, best practices and come back to the council and ask for us to make changes. But I recognize what we're being asked for today is to extend the sunset so that we can consider these recommendations that have come forward. So at this point, I'm not going to put a motion out to eliminate the sunset, but I think when we come back for that fuller discussion, I would like us to consider that. I think Councilor Taylor's point is correct, that the original constituency that came and asked us to implement this have graduated, and the folks who are now the constituency that's benefiting from it might not recognize that it could sunset and go away. And I did have the same question about the working appliances piece. My concern is that, and I see that there's already some prescription in the law around appliances, but my concern would be that then landlords would say, well, then I'm not putting a microwave in that place, or I'm not putting an AC unit in that window, because then I'm obligated now to maintain that. And so I'd want to have a little more information about that. But I do note also, back on the sunset date, the advisory subcommittee didn't make a recommendation around the sunset date. Do you know if they thought about discussing it or had any discussion around it?
They did have discussion around it, but there was no specific date put on them.
And they're not recommending removing the sunset?
It was mixed.
Okay.
But in the end, they moved forward with leaving the sunset, but the group was mixed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So just a thought as you think about what Claire and Betty have talked about and what George said is there seems to me there's no reason why you couldn't consider removing the sunset but putting a review requirement in on a regular basis so that you could achieve both things. So just something for you all to consider. Chris.
Thank you. I am your representative on the Housing Policy Board, which was the group that managed this particular subcommittee. And so I just wanted to speak to who they were and the work that they did. And it was a very good committee. It was made up of a great balance of landlords, tenant advocates, folks who represented public housing. John Van Landingham was there, who is an acknowledged expert in all aspects of this field, both locally and at the state level. And so they really did good work. And as Rochelle says, it was not unanimous in some areas, but in others, I think it was pretty consistent. And one of those was that this has done good work. It has been a successful ordinance, and it has done the job it was intended to do. And so I think the principal discussions, and I'll zero down to the two that were most significant, were why, if it's been doing such a good job, would we want to continue the sunset? And I really kind of think that was a comfort level for folks on the group. I think they probably wouldn't collapse if you got rid of the sunset, but I think it sends a message that we still want to have that ability to review it, and I think that was the comfort level for them. And so I think we need to at least acknowledge that feeling that they still have on their part. A second issue, which is really not reflected in here but was mentioned a little bit, is even though the fee that we collect, $10 per unit, is among the lowest, over the time, because of the efficiencies and the way the operation has been run so well, is they've developed a pretty significant surplus over the years. And while the ordinance doesn't specify the specific rate within the ordinance, it does give the city manager the authority to set that rate. And so I think what the committee wanted to do was to say we need to be very conscious that the rate set per unit needs to be a true reflection of what it takes to run the program, so you don't develop these really significantly large surpluses. And so it doesn't have to be dealt with now, but I told the Housing Policy Board and the members of the committee that I would bring it up, that we need to review the actual rate per unit to make sure that it is not charging more than it needs to charge. But other than that, even the committee said this has been doing good work, and it is something that we should probably continue to do.
Alan.
Yeah, this is a necessary and important health and safety function of the city, and I think it needs to continue as well. This would be the third sunset. Not sure how many more you need, but I agree. I'm not sure why it needs to sunset any longer. I mean, it's proven its value, and it's a necessary health and safety function. We don't sunset the health and safety parts of our codes. We periodically review them, but we don't sunset them. So, as somebody else mentioned, council can end this program anytime they want. So, and we can't bind future councils, but they can end the program if they find that's no longer serving its purpose. I do understand people's concern about the program and having it need to be periodically reviewed. So alternatively, instead of a sunset, I think in a motion, if we said there's no sunset, but we require the staff to do a programmatic review every 5 years and bring it back to council, that satisfies, for me anyway, and hopefully for the people who want to have monitoring of the program, the ability to do that, as opposed to a sunset. So I think that's a preferred way to go. I also understand people's concerns about the amount of the fee and if there's a surplus. Is there a surplus right now, Lori?
There's a balance available based on what we haven't spent and the increase in revenue over the years.
How much is it?
Approximately $300,000.
Okay. And you said that, and I understand the city manager can set the rate. That doesn't count. That doesn't take council approval, right? And you said in the slide that you're in process of reviewing the financials?
We want to do a specific fund forecast related to the growth of the units in the last few years, and then evaluate, since we've been so conservative with our spending, whether that was even realistic, and how we should kind of revisit the budget.
Yeah, I noticed we've had especially in my ward, a big influx of new units, but they're new. So probably don't have too many issues right now, but they may in the future. So with that evaluation and process, the goal, the end is to try to change the program based on the evaluation. Is that where you're heading with it?
Well, we know we've been undercharging, so we have to figure out why we've been doing that. And then if it appears in the forecast and the detailed analysis that the revenues are going to keep going up and our budget's going to stay the same, then we may need to review the fee.
Okay, so that kind of process handles itself, and that can be part of the 5-year review. And I definitely think we need to review the Housing Policy Advisory Board's recommendations, the 5 working electrical systems, carbon monoxide detectors, which, by the way, are required if you sell your house. They have to be installed. Rodent control, working appliances, and shortened timelines, especially for heating systems in the winter, is a big deal. I've had issues with that since there's a lot of rentals from the university kids in my university students in my ward. Question for Glenn. If we put forward a motion for a public hearing on a sunset, and then after the public hearing decide not to do a sunset, but rather do a periodic review, can we still do that after or is that require is that so substantially different that we require another ordinance change and another public hearing?
The proposed ordinance would say we're going to sunset to sometime in the future. And what you're wondering is, could we change that to say there should not be any sunset at all?
But there would be a periodic review every 5 years.
Given the prior controversial nature of this program, I would say err on the side of caution, in which case have another public hearing. Because people who might not come out to talk about just extending the sunset for 4 years might want to have an opportunity to say, wait a minute, don't.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to think about doing that, then at a minimum we would want to embed in the proposed ordinance both options, so that if somebody did want to say, oh, I don't like that option, at least they're on notice that that's an option, and then they can come talk to the council. One other thing for you to think about, because this program sunsets on September 30th and your public hearing would be in September, it will take 6 votes to make sure that there isn't a lapse. So as you're thinking about what to have in that ordinance, think about whether you can get 6 votes. The staff recommendation is just extend the sunset for 2, 3, 4 months, and hopefully you could get 6 votes to do that, so that the program doesn't lapse. Then you could have the additional conversation about, do you want a sunset? Do you want a program review? What do you want to do with the recommendations that you got? So our recommendation to you is you give us direction to bring back an ordinance in September that would extend to the end of the year, and then that gives you the fall to have the other conversations and decide what you really want to do.
Right. That's to give us more time to figure it all out.
Right.
Option. Okay. I'm in favor of that, but I also think that we should probably sunset. Not sunset, but do a periodic review.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. When's do we do this annually? Yes?
No.
Or 2 years ago was the last time?
12.
The last time we were here was, I should put it down, in 2012.
Because I remember the conversation about the fee amount and the positive balance surplus that we had at the time of that. And I remember the conversation about how by the time we got to the end of the next time that would probably be gone, that by adding those new things, the mold and the other pieces that we would, and the change in the number of units would probably eat up that difference. And it seems we've grown it since then. So I too would like to talk about the review of the per door rate. I'm interested to know, because Betty mentioned this, and I honestly don't know the ordinance in depth well enough to know the answer to it. What are the current pieces of this that keep someone, a property owner, from retaliation. So, for example, I complain that, I don't have a working smoke detector, and the landlord's forced to put one in, or they get fined, or whatever. And then the next month they say, "Gosh, we need you to move along." What part of the ordinance? How does it address that manner of retaliation?
So currently, there's actually nothing in the ordinance itself. There is state law that says you can't retaliate, but there's that's hard to prove, obviously. But there isn't anything in local code, and I think that was a conversation that maybe you all were having under tenant protection rights.
If I could, I know that a lot of what we do with this particular program, while done on the local level and done with more under a closer eye, let's say, perhaps, of the city, mirrors a lot of state law, is my understanding, and a lot of state agency work. So are the suggested revisions from the Housing Policy Board already in state law for those particular items, or not?
So some of them are in state law, yes.
Which ones aren't?
The rats and rodents may not be. I'm not positive on that. The challenge is how you get repairs done, or how you get what you need to have safe and habitable housing. Without having a local ordinance, it forces a tenant to have to go through the court system.
Yeah.
And even once they go through the court system, if they get a judgment and the owner still doesn't do anything,
Okay.
Carbon monoxide detectors.
Thank you. I am.
Betty?
Thank you. I think we should adopt all the recommendations of the Housing Policy Board, plus screens. I disagree that screens are not a necessity. They really are a necessity in the summertime, at least. And as for working appliances, if you rent a place with a part of the deal is a working appliance, then they should have to maintain it. And maybe some people wouldn't supply them then, and that's okay, but you should know what you're getting when you rent. So I think that keeping the appliances that are there working should be a part of it. The rats, I assumed that meant rats indoors. Did it mean rats on the property?
it does.
Well, they're everywhere.
Typically, if you
and more of them as more people have chickens.
That's a straight line.
Yes, that's what's creating
So,
that.
I mean, I assumed that meant if there were rats in your house.
That's what normally somebody doesn't complain until you have a problem with rats in your house.
I lived in a place once where the landlord said there were no rats, and it was an apartment complex, and a cat brought a rat into a living room next to me, and they called the landlord, said, "Come and look." As for the surplus of money, if we add some requirements as have been suggested, that may cost more money to check out those. Also, it might be a good idea to add a follow-up inspection when someone has complained, to see even if they do kick out that tenant and they have another one, have they corrected the situation? Some cities I know have regular inspections of all rental properties, not all in 1 year, but all, and that's something we might want to consider at some point too. Because some renters are really helpless. They can't afford just... When we had this big argument when we first started this, well, why don't they just move? Well, they can't afford to move, or else they wouldn't be living in that dump in the first place. And besides that, everybody knows it costs a lot of money to move because you have to make deposits and so forth. So anyway, I think it's a really important program, and we may want to strengthen it, and I wouldn't be hasty about saying we have too much money. It may take more to do it better. Thank you.
The only other thing I think about that, too, is I think you said in your initial comments that there is a need for more information to get out to folks about what their rights are. And that, to me, seems to come within the purview of this code. And so I would be thinking that if you have access to the funds to do it, that we should implement a stronger education and outreach program. Because people should know what their, we all believe people should know what their rights are. So, you want to put a motion on the table?
Absolutely, Mayor. I move to direct the city manager to prepare an ordinance to extend the sunset date to March 1st, 2017, to allow time for further discussion of Housing Policy Advisory Board recommendations.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Okay, all those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in favor and none in opposition. Passes. Thank you. With that, we're through the business of the day.
I'm moving, right?